If you don't know where to start, literature essays can be very, very daunting. Today, I'll show you step by step how to write one. Firstly, we need to note that a literature essay consists of different parts. These parts include your introduction, body, and conclusion. Now, what you might not be aware of is your introduction and your conclusion is basically already written for you. Let's take an example so that you understand better what I mean. Okay, so our question states, in Anne with the E, we see two structures applied by teachers to educate children. Explain these structures, how they impacted the learners or students, and whether or not you agree with one structure more than the other. Now you see this and you're already like, what is going on? There's a lot of information given, a lot of questions asked, and now you just need to think of something to write. Before you get overwhelmed, I'd recommend to grab your highlighters and break the question down for you. This will help you to write more concisely, which helps the examinator, and it will help you structure your brain to make sure you answer everything. So the first thing that they give us is a statement. We know that there are two structures that is being applied by who? By the teachers to educate the children. So this statement will help you to see what direction they are wanting to go with this. And with E is a TV series, but the same can be applied with a book or a short story or a poem. This will also be used in your introduction. Remember what I said earlier? When you write your introduction, you basically say, in Anne with the E, we see two structures applied by teachers to educate children. You can literally say that exact statement over to them and then elaborate on the rest. So you would say, these structures impacted the learners or students. These structures impacted the students, and I agree with one structure more than the other. So you're changing the questions that follow the main statement and turning them into statements. And there you have your introduction done. So there you wrote a whole paragraph like the one that they gave you without doing much work at all or even thinking. You just rewrite the question into a statement and use the statement that they've given you. Now let's delve into the questions. The first one is that you need to explain the structures. Sorry, here needs to be this. Well, that's quite easy. If you know your book or you know your TV series, a lot of the time they pick a topic that is quite obvious. So the two structures in Anne with the E, for me at least, was very obvious between the two teacher styles. Next, we speak about how they impacted the students. That is also quite easy. If you have already explained these two structures, this gives you two paragraphs, right? One structure, other structure. Now, that is 2 to 4 paragraphs that's done. And now that you explain how those two structures impacted the learners, it's 2 more paragraphs or 4 more paragraphs. It all depends on what you want to elaborate on more or less. Then finally, we have whether or not you agree with one structure more than the other. It's always better to assume that yes, you do. If they ask you a question like this, do you agree with the structure? Do you think that this happened for this reason? Explain your answer. You always say yes, even if you don't actually agree with it. I found that the examinators usually ask this question with yes being the main answer. Now, I'm sure there will be exceptions where you're like, yeah, this is definitely not true. And if you can motivate your answer good enough, go with no. I mean, who am I to tell you what to do? But I would recommend going usually with yes. So yes, in this case, I do agree with one structure more than the other. Let me just give you an example of what I would mention content-wise on this question. If you watch Anne with the E or if you haven't watched Anne with the E, it doesn't matter. It's just the basic concept that I'm trying to explain to you and show you how I apply this. So, introduction. We have, in Anne with the E, we see two structures applied by teachers to educate children. In this essay, I will explain these structures, how they impacted the students, and the structure that I agree with most. Introduction, done. Explain the two structures. That's our first question. The first structure is much more strict. The learners don't have freedom of speech. They need to listen to everything that the teacher says without even questioning it. The second structure is much more free in an academic sense. The learners can actually question the teacher and question the content that they are learning and learn the content better. There are two main ways that you could structure this essay. Either you can speak about structure 1 completely in terms of explaining what structure 1 is and explaining its impact, and then going to explaining structure 2 and explaining its impact. Or what you could do is go question-wise, explain the impact of 1, explain the impact of 2. Let's go with question-based. Okay, so we explained the structures. Secondly, how they impacted the students. Well, structure 1 made the students a lot more hesitant to speak to the teacher if they had questions, which prohibited their learning. The other structure encouraged learners to ask questions, encouraged them to learn and really understand the content very deeply. They also had an education that was much more rich content-wise because they had a sense of how it was applied to the actual world, where structure 1 limited them in the sense that it was never really practically applied. They were too scared to speak up. Do I agree with one system or structure more than the other? Yes, of course I do. I agree with structure 2 more. I feel that structure 2 has a lot more benefits than structure 1. I say this because students are obviously learning content better, and that's why they go to school after all, whereas structure 1 prohibits their learning. Now, I might be repeating some points, but like I said, it's just to give you the idea of what a literature essay is and how to write it. Now, your conclusion. Your conclusion is technically already written for you as well, just like your introduction. You can state the statement in the beginning again, but you don't have to. Then you can say, in this essay, I explained the structures, how they impacted the learners or students, and that I agree with system 2 more than system 1. Hopefully this essay explained all of these points thoroughly. And that's it. That's your literature essay. Now, here's a little extra something that you can do, but honestly, it's really going the extra mile, but for exercise, you can do this. So if I'm really passionate about a series, a book, or a poem, or anything in that line, I love writing literature essays so much that I would write a literature essay on the poems, the books, the series, and I would just write everything that was in my mind. So like this, I would write down a question for myself and try to encapsulate everything that I want to explain in that question, and then write an essay about it. And obviously there, you're not restricted to word count, you're not restricted to spelling and all that type of stuff, although it is still important. Grammar and spelling is still important. What you could do is, if your teacher is willing and if you have a good teacher, you can always ask them to read that essay, and even though they haven't watched the series or the book, they can still give you guidelines. They can still tell you, oh, you need to look at this, you need to do this. And another thing, I just gave you the basic body and idea of what you should do. Your teacher might give you different information, but this is a good basis to work from. If your teacher says something else, rather follow what your teacher says. Or if you've seen in a memo of a question paper that they do it differently, then probably you should follow that more, but implement it into the structure and you will be fine. This is more for if you are struggling with content, what you should write, how can I write like 350 words in such a short time. This is probably going to help you a lot because, like I said, introduction is done, conclusion is already written for you, and then comparing the structures gives you a lot of content to work from. Good luck with your studies, good luck with your literature essay, and if you have a video idea for any educational content that I should create for you, let me know down in the comments below.